Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased to have everyone here joining us for Capturing What Matters, a human-centered design documentation guide launch. My name is Mary Phillips. I'm a technical advisor with Adolescence 360 at PSI, and I am really pleased to be able to hand it off to Tracy Johnson today to give us a welcome. So Tracy, over to you.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Tracy Johnson. I'm a senior officer and design anthropologist at the Gates Foundation. While people are still joining, and just to sort of set the stage, I thought that I would give a little bit of context for the exciting work that you are going to see today. As Mary said, Capturing What Matters, the HCD documentation guide. So about 10 years ago, a group of us at the Gates Foundation, as well as USAID and many of our partners, got together to establish a community of practice around designforhealth.org. We all saw great promise for design in the global health space. But we also saw, sort of people thinking about how do I do this? How do I bring this into my space? What does good look like, for example? So we wanted to sort of put together a set of guidelines for how to do design well in global health and development. And we organized the thinking around three parts. The first was the mindset. How do we really instill a new mindset in people, being more problem solving focused, really starting with the users, questioning our assumptions, and so on. All of which design enables us to do. The second pillar was the skill set. So a lot of designers are clearly trained in similar methodologies, visual problem solving for one, but they also have different skills that they bring to the process of design that are important through the different stages of the work. And the third pillar was process. And this was really important to deliver on that promise of how design is a very strong facilitator of interdisciplinary cooperation. It was also really critical for how design could do more to demonstrate the rigor of the practice through things like replicability. And it was also really important for, that all important moment of the handoff where we take the ideas, take the solutions to implementing partners, to implementing research scientists, just as a few examples, who really then take the solutions and grow them and build them and integrate them into health systems and health practices. And so one of the things that rests on that notion of process is really being able to document what are we doing, what are we learning, and why are we making the decisions that we're making along the way. And that's something that really has never come into being until the development of this new guide. So with that, I hope that people are really excited for what you're going to see today, what you're going to learn, and how you're going to apply more of this documentation into the amazing work that you all are doing. So back over to you, Mary, and the team.
Thanks so much, Tracy, for setting the stage for us. I think that was a really great kickoff, and I hope you all are excited to see the guide, which we are actually about to drop a link into the chat right now so you can check it out as we are talking. I'm going to very briefly walk you through today's agenda, but before I do that, I do want to acknowledge that some of our co-authors are not presenting with us today. A few are on the line and a few couldn't make it. So I just want to acknowledge them. That's Wanja Gitau, Peter Nashoku, Megan Cothrell, Asaitu Choi, Angelica Mercado, Abanego Musau, and Katrina Mitchell. They all had a huge hand in shaping this guide, so we really, really want to thank them for their contributions. Today, we're going to talk about why did we make this guide? We're going to walk you through the structure of the guide to sort of give you an orientation to how to use it. We're going to show you an example of one of the templates and how you might use it. We are going to hear from a project that did a phenomenal job with documentation and take some of their lessons learned. And then we're hoping to have a brief conversation about where we go from here. So let me hand it off to Liz, who's going to kick us off with Why This Guide. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you to the support and leadership of you and PSI for driving this work forward and getting us across the finish line and here to this launch today. And hello to everyone who's joined us. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Wherever you're joining us from, we're so happy that you chose to spend this time here with us. I'm guessing that since you are here, you all have your own reasons for why a guide for documenting HCD processes is useful and important. And I'd actually love to invite you to share some of these in the chat if you would. And meanwhile, I'll shed a bit of light as to how we, as this group here, got to this guide. So, next slide. All right, why this guide? Well, so much value in human-centered design goes beyond the outputs that are developed, as Tracy talked about. There is real power in it as a process. There is nuanced, data-driven, human-driven decision making that drives this work forward. And it really is good design practice to demonstrate how decisions were made, how assumptions are validated, and how user-centered outputs were developed and selected. And beyond that, documentation can also support the rigor of the design methods that were used in a project and overall support the credibility of this work as we work together to advance this practice and advance this field. Next slide. So, documentation was pitched as a part of our learning agenda back in 2018, 2019, when the HCD Exchange Community of Practice, this was the project that I was working on at the time, when this was forming. And then in 2023, we had just conducted a gap analysis to see where more exploration was still needed in the practice of HCD in public health work. Documentation came up again. So when Mary came and sent that first email back in, I think it was 2024, to come together to tackle this HCD documentation challenge, I cannot tell you how quickly I was hitting the reply button saying, yes, how soon can we start? We've got to get this going. And then even this past spring, I've been pulling method sections from HCD projects and public health literature for a scoping review. And the variation in these method sections is truly staggering. There were a small handful of projects that were extremely detailed. They were outlining their workshops, their prioritization, their voting methods. It was very generous, very beautiful. But then others, maybe they listed the names of the activities that they did. They listed that they held listening sessions or developed how might we statements or conducted co-design workshops. But then for some, many actually, had only one or two lines saying that they used human-centered design or user-centered design and then provided a definition from IDEO. How could we expect researchers, practitioners, donors to trust or try out this method if we aren't sharing it? There's a persistent gap in what it means and what it takes to do documentation. And yet, it's integral for our internal learning and transparency, for our reporting and sharing to donors and stakeholders, and also more widely to help increase credibility, approachability, and rigor of HCD. So, all of us here on this team shared a need for some kind of guidance and came with some experiences to share. We all came together. If you want to go to the next slide, we had representatives from PSI, JSI, Pathfinder, JPIGO, ThinkPlace, FHI 360, the people here today speaking, and the people that Mary mentioned earlier. We came together to develop this guide. It's designed to help ourselves and others think through what parts of the HCD process to capture and share so that audiences can understand the design team's choices and the insights that influence the final products and solution. And really, like Tracy said, guide that handover process so that it can be picked up and used. In the guide, we've got templates and examples, and it really should draw upon information that already exists in your team's Miro boards or files or shared drives. We hope that more consistent documentation of our HCD work can lead to a greater understanding of how HCD frameworks are applied and really offer a thorough view behind that proverbial curtain so that good processes can be replicated and we can gain a better grasp on the impact that HCD has on our work. It can lead to more nuanced and a richer understanding of the end users that we co-design with as well. So again, I'm sure you all have your reasons why this matters to you and your work, which I'm looking forward to reading in the chat. Hopefully some of you have shared. And we hope that you'll be able to take the pieces from this guide that you need, and it can help you in your work, whatever end you're working towards. So now, without further ado, I'll pass it back to Mary to share an overview of the Human-Centered Design Documentation Guide.
Thank you so much, Liz. So as Liz said, I'm going to walk you through the structure of the guide. If I can get my slides to advance. So we have 3 sections in the guide. Part 1 is an orientation. Part 2, really the heart of the guide, are our templates. And then part 3, the inspiration gallery, which I'll explain a little bit more about. So part 1, orientation. This is really the why and how of documentation. And in this section, we're really trying to help you and ourselves determine, why should we document at all? What are your goals for documentation? And what are the resources that you have available for documentation? And then from there flows a lot of how you will use the rest of the guide. So in this section, I think some really useful tools include an assessment that you can do with your own team to determine your HCD documentation needs and the resources available, a list of tools available sort of, in the wider world to support documentation to make it a bit easier. And then we also have some high-level guidance on ethical and responsible documentation. In parts 2 and 3, we have organized them by, we've got HCD phases. So essentially there are subsections within each section, and they are organized by the order in which you're probably going to do activities in your HCD process. So of course, different organizations use different names for these, but we found that, the activities tend to be quite similar from one organization to another. So we've set them up as initially problem framing and preparation. So that's all the kind of pre-work that you're doing before insight gathering to get clear on your objectives. Maybe you're doing some desk research. Maybe you're undergoing a full ethical review process, all your planning and prep. Phase 2 is insights and design principles. So that is all the community level work that you are doing to unearth barriers and opportunities. Usually this phase culminates in your final insight statements and design principles. Phase 3, we're calling promising prototypes. And this is everything that you do to develop and test your prototypes. So going from concept to the actual physical item that you're testing, getting feedback and iterating on it. And then phase 4 is handoff. This is when your design is finished and you're ready to share it. We know that this can take really different forms depending on what you're handing off, whether it's, a physical product or some kind of service, or maybe just deep insights on a really complex problem or idea. So we've tried to offer a structure that is flexible enough to be useful for many use cases. So part 2, again, organized into these subsections by phase. This is the real heart of the guide. And for each template, we have an intro slide. Here's an example of what one looks like. So, we give you the name of the template. We sort of tell you what it's about. We give you a little bit of guidance on how to use it. And then for some of the templates, we have these tips, just sort of how to actually use them in the real world based on our own experience. Then we have the template itself. You can see this gives you instructions on what goes where, what to fill in, the kind of information to provide. And then because blank templates can be a little intimidating and maybe sometimes hard to wrap your mind around, we have created an example project that runs throughout the whole guide and filled in our templates using our example project. So this project is set in a fictional country using fictional data, drawing from our different experience with projects. So you can sort of see, oh, this is what this means. This is the kind of information I can provide here. In the full guide itself, and again, there are links to the guide in the chat, so you're welcome to check it out as we're talking. That's a PDF, so those documents are not editable, but we do have editable versions of all the templates on Canva, which is an online design software. And I want to just try and show you what that looks like. So there's a second link that we've shared, which is a one-pager PDF. it has this link and some guidance. And if you click on the link, it will take you to this template, and you can click on View Template. And it should, if you have an account, you have this option to open an editor. If you do not have an account, you'll have to sign up for one, but it's free. And then it will take you right to a full suite of all the templates that are able to be changed. So you can come here, you can, just type in what your phases are called. You can change any colors. If you are unfamiliar with Canva, it's pretty simple. And if you look at it and you're like, it's not that simple, there are plenty of YouTube tutorials that can, get you oriented. So those are the Canva templates we have back in our slideshow. We hope that you'll use them and adapt them and really make them fit for purpose for you. Then we have part 3, which we've called the inspiration gallery. And as we were building up this guide, we knew that there were a lot of projects that had done really great documentation, and there was just a lot of wonderful work to draw from. So this section is kind of designed to go beyond the templates. Maybe you're looking at the template and you're looking at your project and you're thinking, this template doesn't exactly help me communicate what I need about my project. And so if that's the case, we urge you to jump to the inspiration gallery, check out the activity for the activity that you're working on, and see if there's an example here that can help you think differently about how to communicate about what you've learned. So we have all these examples. We've annotated them to call out what might be of interest in how they've documented. And then we have the source, so you can go directly to the full project and see what they've done. So this guide is a little bit long. So in order to help you get oriented quickly, one of the first pages, I believe page 3, is our quick start guide. And this just has links to what we think might be sort of high valuable resources or things that you might want to get started with right away. So you can check out this page and say, I'm looking for a template to document what I learned during insight gathering. And you can just click here and it'll take you right to that section. So hopefully this will make things easier to navigate. Some takeaways about this guide. It's organized into 3 sections: orientation, templates, inspiration. We really don't encourage reading it cover to cover. That's really not what this guide is designed for. Read the orientation, get yourself all set, and then jump to what you need. As I said, please edit and adapt the templates to suit your needs. They are here to get you started, so you're not looking at a blank page, but they are absolutely not set in stone and should be adapted based as needed. And then this is a theme I think we've already hit on a few times today, but we really believe that any documentation is better than no documentation. And so we know that this process of documenting can be cumbersome, but are hoping with this guide that if you took just a few minutes to complete each template without making any major changes to them, you'd be left with a really strong record of your project at the end. And so we urge you to try this out, even if it's a bit messy and maybe not as beautiful as you wish. So that concludes my section. I am going to hand it off to Olivia, who's going to take us through what we're calling templates in action. Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you so much, Mary. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'll be taking you through this section of templates in action. And Mary has already shown us a couple of templates on Canva that we can use in the 4 different phases of HCD. When you get time, you'll be able to look at them. So in this section, I'll specifically be talking about the insight statement template. So I'll walk you through what it is, how it's structured, and show you a real example of how we completed it in a project that we've worked in at ThinkPlace. Thank you. So what is an insight statement? For those who might be joining and they don't have a big background on design. So this is something that captures what your research has revealed, why does it matter, and what it means for design. So it should be very clear, such that anyone who was not even in the field can be able to understand it. So by the time we're getting to these templates that I'll be showing you in a few, you already have your insight. So what I won't be talking about today is how do we develop the insights. That is backend, that a lot of work will have been put into developing the insights. So what you're talking about today, as some of my colleagues have already mentioned, is documentation. So how do we document your insight that you already have such that it's clear and very consistent? So that's what I'll be taking us through. Next slide, please. So I'll begin with a blank template. So Mary has already said a blank template can be very confusing. And you'll see in the guide that we have the blank template, and we also have a template that's already filled. So this is the template that we'll be using for when you're documenting an insight. So it has 4 fields, as you can see. So it has the insight name, which is your headline. You can put like just one sentence that captures the core truth behind your research, and it should be a standalone and should be able to be communicate something meaningful to someone who wasn't in the field with you, such that if they just see that statement, they are able to have at least a sense of what was happening in the field. And then we'll have additional description. So in that box, this is where you unpack the headline. So we said the headline, the insight name is just very brief, just a one-liner. So in this additional description box, you unpack the headline, you give some context, some tension, but most importantly, you have to end it with what it means for the design. Right? So just don't end it at just giving the context and trying to explain the research. No. So just pack it in such a way that you're able to say, this is what it means for design, and I'll be able to show you in the next slide. But before that, we'll go to supporting quotes or other data. So this is your evidence box, and this is the part where it builds credibility on what you have done in field. So this you can put like 2 to 3 quotes from the field, whether you talked to a community leader, whether you talked to a mother, or whether you talked to a healthcare worker. So you can bring different voices here in your supporting quotes. And then the part that I love the most is the how might we question. So this is the bridge from insight to action. So the how might we is able to translate what you've learned into a design challenge. So the how might we should be open enough to allow creative solutions, but also very specific enough to stay anchored in the insights that you had. Thank you so much. Next slide. Okay, so this is a case study of a project that we did at Think Place, and it was based in Somalia. And so I'll be taking you through how we filled these templates and from the insights that we got. So here we already had an insight, and the insight name was Trusted Stories Can Become Trusted Health Pathways. So here we were very deliberate when we were developing this insight name. So we led with the community's existing strength. What is their strength already? Their strength is in storytelling. We didn't start with the problem, right? And what here we were trying to solve the problem that was there was vaccination hesitancy. So we started with trusted stories, which is the strength of the community when it comes to storytelling. And then we were able now to open it up to a more creative way where we say it can become trusted health pathways. So this was our insight name, and it can stand alone, as you can see. And when the moment you just give someone this, they can be able to take it up. And then under the additional description, this is where now we go into unpack what was it about? What's just further giving context to the insight name that I've mentioned above. So what here we did, we were able to name the specific community. Who are we talking about is the Somali communities. And it also explains the behavior around behind that and the tension. And then you'll see that it critically ends with what it means for design. So I'll just quickly read through it so that we can just get a feel of what I'm talking about. So in Somali communities, vaccination decisions are not shaped by information alone. Caregivers often rely on trusted stories, lived experiences, and visible proof from people around them, because many communities rely on oral communication, what neighbors, community leaders, and other caregivers say can either build confidence or reinforce fear. So when you transition to the next paragraph, it starts with this means that, and this is the most important part of the description box. This is where now observation becomes implication. And if your description does not have that moment where you say that this means what this means for how we design, then it can easily remain as an observation as opposed to being an insight. So I'll go to the next box, which is supporting quotes or other data. So this is the evidence box, as I said. It gives a lot of credibility to the insight statement that we had, which is the trusted stories can become trusted health pathways. So of course, we had many quotes from all the people that we talked to in the field, but then we highlighted three of them. So one you'll see is a voice of a community healthcare worker, and another voice is for the female caregiver, and another one for the community leader. So at Think Place, we work with a framework called the Four Voices of Design. So it's the voice of intent, the voice of experience, the voice of expertise, the voice of design. So the principle behind the Four Voices of Design is that strong design decisions are informed by multiple perspectives and not just one. So it's very important when you're building your support quotes, you're able to like put different voices of design there. You don't have to put, of course, all four of them, but just ensure that we cover as much as possible to give it more credibility to anyone who'll be looking at it. And then we go to my favorite part, which is the how might we question. And as I say, this is the bridge from design to insights to design. So here we had two how might we questions, and each one of them will open up to a different design direction depending on where you're going to. And of course, it's advisable don't have too many of them when you're documenting that, maybe two or three maximum, and you'll be able to it will be able to open you up to a lot of opportunity areas. So yes, this is the insight statement when it's filled up. So it's a guide, of course, and it can be adapted. And one thing to always remember is that one insight, just one template. Of course, you can have so many insights, but each insight should be maintained in one template. Thank you so much. I'll hand it over to Bram to take us through the documentation showcase. Thank you so much. Over to you, Bram.
Great. Thank you so much, Olivia. So, greetings, everyone. My name is Brahm, and I work as a senior manager in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning team at Pathfinder International. So, if we go to the next slide. So, an example of HCD documentation that I'm going to be talking about is the Beyond Bias project, which was implemented by Pathfinder a few years ago. So, before I talk about kind of my own documentation experience, key takeaways, and lessons learned, let me just provide some background and context about this project so to kind of frame it for folks. So, this is a Gates-funded project with a budget of about $6 million US, and it was implemented from 2016 to 2022. So it's a 6-year project with a budget of about $1 million per year, which makes this a large HCD endeavor. So the main goal of the Beyond Bias project was to design and test a novel solution aimed at addressing the issue of provider bias in Burkina Faso, in Pakistan, and in Tanzania. So provider bias, which is the belief that young, unmarried people should not be sexually active or that married women should prove their fertility, is a driver of judgmental and poor quality sexual reproductive health care. It's a challenging AYSRH issue in a lot of low and middle income countries. And this project was a collaborative partnership between Pathfinder, the prime implementer that provided AYSRH expertise, but it was also the platform that implemented the Beyond Bias intervention in different country contexts. Y-Labs, our design partner who helped us develop a novel intervention using HCD, Camber Collective, who helped integrate the segmentation analyses within our intervention, and the RAND Corporation, our external evaluation team with expertise in behavioral economics. So together, this consortium designed, developed, tested, and implemented and evaluated the beyond bias intervention. So a lot of different prototypes were developed to tackle the issue of provider bias, but let me just quickly present to you the final solution set so you have a sense of what that intervention looks like. So let's go to the next slide. So at the end of the HCD process, the final solution set was a collection of interventions targeted at the provider to change their behavior on how they treated adolescents and youth coming in for family planning services. So there are three kind of main components of the beyond bias intervention, highlighted by the three icons in that middle row, which correspond to different phases of the behavior change model. So the first one, the summit, entails a one-day workshop with family planning providers. This was designed to humanize bias, improve emotional connectivity with youth, and address providers' fears and concerns of community backlash. The second component is Connect, which is centered around a peer-to-peer learning platform via WhatsApp and monthly health facility meetings. And this was designed to educate providers around the safety of FP methods for youth, addressing concerns about fertility delays, and providing agency for providers to serve youth. And finally, for rewards, we created accountability for service quality by offering performance-based reviews and rewards to help shift professional norms to encourage high-quality FP services. So the three components combined, the summit, connect, and rewards, were designed to make changes at the provider level to reduce provider bias and increase the quality of care among young women seeking FP services. So now that we have a better understanding of the Beyond Bias project, let me share with you some of the main lessons that I've learned about HCD documentation. And there are three lessons that I'll share. So let's start with the first one, which for me and the team was to think about HCD documentation, about what's big and what's also small. So when we think about HCD documentation as part of project deliverables, what's the main product that you want to showcase at the end of the project? So in addition to your big documentation product, it's also very important to think about the small documentation outputs that you want to produce in your HCD project. The combination of both big and small documentation product is an important component of an HCD project. So let me show you what we did as part of our project. So let's go to the next slide. So in the Beyond Bias project, the big documentation deliverable for us was the development of the how-to guide. We wanted to develop a documentation product that not only described the intervention, but also helped users adopt and implement the different solution set across a country context. The image that you see on the slide was copied from the HCD documentation guide and provides an example of our handoff materials. So it's very comprehensive. It provides access to meeting agendas, materials, and indicators needed to implement the Beyond Bias intervention in different geographical contexts. It also shares some tips and important lessons from our own implementation experience. So again, this is a very detailed and comprehensive documentation product that was suitable for a project with the sizable budget. So I'm aware that this may not be applicable to most HCD projects out there. But I think it's important to think big about the main documentation product that you hope to achieve and to develop as part of your project. So in addition to thinking big, it's also important to think small. So if we go to the next slide, for us, the small documentation product was developing slide decks that documented key achievements, insights, and final decisions throughout the different phases of the HCD process. So in this slide, I presented the different phases of the Beyond Bias project, from design research to idea generation, rough prototyping, design solutions, live prototyping, all the way to pilot testing and evaluation of the final solution set. So each HCD project will have different processes and different phases. So as a result, it was important for us to document kind of key takeaways from the different phases. So these slide decks that were generated were useful to update the donor on our successes, challenges, and kind of document the rationale as we evolve through the different phases of the HCD process. It was also important for us to document what happened throughout the life of the project, especially when we were dealt with staffing changes on our end. So yes, important to have big documentation product as such as the how-to guide, but for me, the small documentation exercise was just as equally important. So let's go to the next lesson. All right. So the next lesson, as it relates to documentation experience, is to think about your project data. So as a public health researcher, most of my studies will have a defined methodology with clear sample sizes. In an HCD project, the solution sets and intervention changes over time. And because of this dynamic process, you need to think carefully about the different data sources at your disposal. And the different data sources are important because your documentation experience is often based on the data sources available to you. And Olivia mentioned about the evidence box as she was walking through the practical example of filling out the insight templates. So that's why I think the data source is an important lesson to think carefully. If we go to the next slide, I'm presenting some of the common data sources that HCD implementers use. So you have in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, youth role play, mystery clients, co-design workshops, and journey mapping. So, and I'm sure that there are other data sources out there depending on the project you are implementing. So these data sources provide insights as to the potential success and viability of your solution set. So as you're testing prototypes and figuring out which solution set to take to the next phase of the project, I'm sure that there are other data sources that are often ignored and missed, such as, stakeholder consensus or team meeting notes that document the reasons for why certain prototypes and solutions are promoted while others are dropped. So the documentation of the decision-making process to advance solution sets, I think, is very important. And as implementers, I think we should be thinking about this data source more carefully. This is where we're kind of shining some of the light into the HCD Black box. For us in the Beyond Bias project, the presentations that developed at the end of each phase tries to capture some of this internal decision-making process. So in addition to using some of the common HCD data sources that you see on the slide, we have also used internal team meeting minutes, stakeholder consultation notes to document some insights into our decision-making process, which I believe is important for a lot of HCD projects. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the final lesson for my HCD documentation experience is thinking about allies. So in the world of HCD programming and implementation, there's a lot of competition, but there's also a lot of allies and like-minded colleagues who look past the organizational branding and work towards the benefit of achieving a common goal. So for us in the Beyond Bias project, we had our own communication team, our own kind of dissemination strategy, but it was also important for us to share results and amplify our findings through allies and networks in the HCD community. And let me show you what this looks like in the Beyond Bias project. So as we were approaching the end and wrapping up the Beyond Bias project, we took advantage of allies and champions that were promoting HCD efforts within our community. So the first ally that we had were folks from PRB that were implementing the Breakthrough Research Project. They were very interested in projects implementing behavior change at the provider level, which is exactly what the Beyond Bias project was doing. So through a collaborative effort, the Pathfinder team worked closely with colleagues at PRB to carefully document the Beyond Bias project. The HCD process that was used, key findings from the external evaluation of the Beyond Bias intervention, to our own lessons and insights about the project. So it's funny because most people that are interested about Beyond Bias learn about the project from the PRB website instead of the Pathfinder website. So that just shows that there are allies and that you could kind of take advantage and work closely together. So, in addition to working closely with PRB, we also had the opportunity to work closely with the HCD exchange that was implemented by JSI. As you see from the image on the right, they've done a good job spotlighting and documenting our experience from the Beyond Bias project. So it's a wonderful community of HCD advocates, implementers, researchers, providing a useful platform that synthesized and curated HCD knowledge in an accessible manner. So in any case, I share my positive experience working with allies such as PRB and JSI as an example to work with like-minded champions and allies as you think about how to best document your HCD project. And with that, that wraps up some of the key lessons that I've learned in documenting an HCD project. And I'll pass the microphone over to my colleague, Melinda. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Bram. And also thank you to Olivia, Liz, and Mary for their presentations today. And also to everyone who contributed to this guide who might not be on the speaker panel, including I must have a shout out to JSI's HCD exchange team, particularly Liz, who you've met, but also Muthoni Wachira, Belinda Kwamboka, and Peter Nasoko. And also, of course, would be possible without the support of the Gates Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation. So thank you. I am Melinda McKay. I'm Director of Behavioral Sciences for JSI. And I'm delighted to host about a 15-minute Q&A session. So what we're hearing from our panelists who've been talking is that HCD is increasingly mainstreamed across our fields, but as Bram called it, still something of a bit of a black box. So we really hope that this guide is a really good facilitator to help people to unpack that and to be able to adopt HCD processes more easily in their work. We know HCD is messy, but it's in that mess that you find the magic. And if those stories aren't documented, we lose that institutional memory and we lose opportunity for others and ourselves to keep learning, adapting, and building on what came before. Now, before we open it up for questions from folks, I'd like to take a quick read. We're going to have a poll, which I'll ask Elizabeth to launch. We're going to ask folks a bit of a setup question. How many people have ever finished an HCD project and later wished they had documented more? A simple yes, no. We should be getting the poll lined up soon. But would love to also, as we're kind of asking that question, would love to know, so the poll's up, just hit yes or no. Would you have preferred to have documented more after you'd finished that HCD project? And then if you want to answer in the chat, I'm curious for a little bit of, extra detail here. What's the, if your answer's yes, what's the one thing you most wish had been captured? You can put that in the chat if you'd like, as we gather some answers here. We've got over 70 folks on the line, so don't be shy. Give us your answer. And then any thoughts, in any kind of opinions in terms of, what is the thing, the elements that you wish you had captured more of? You can put that in the chat. All right. Diana, wish she had documented the method. Great. All right. Well, I think we've got enough of a shift here in the answers. Clearly, it was a setup. We know, yes. We would have, most of us would have wished they had documented more. Curious if anyone who answered no or who thinks no wants to add in the chat why they think they didn't need to capture more information, more on the process. There's just so much information trapped in these Miro boards, in flip charts, laptops, but how much of that learning is actually accessible to the next team? And as I mentioned before, even you, trying to solve a similar problem. Um, I'd love to perhaps, if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can raise it to the panelists. But I actually have a bit of a question um, to all of our panelists. Actually, like how do you currently integrate documentation into your day to day? Even beyond the projects, say Bram, beyond the Beyond Bias project, how are you documenting day to day? Bram, if you want to share some of your perspectives on that.
Yeah, hopefully folks can hear me. I think there was some
Hmm.
connectivity issue.
No
Great.
problem.
So, a good question. I think documentation has always been challenging. We as implementers often prioritize a lot of the donor deliverables, such as annual reports, progress reports, and we have to think carefully on how to strategically share insights from a project. So at Pathfinder, our communication team has various guidance on how to showcase and document projects. They could be as simple as two pagers on what the project is all about, all the way to technical briefs, which are 6 pages, showcase key insights from data, document the methods and process used, somewhere in between of like a learning brief. So depending on the methods used, the different types of data sources, and the intention to share results to key target audience, there's a host of kind of like learning products, learning documents that we try to work closely with our projects and our country troops to kind of encourage. Some of this is mandated by the donor, so it helped us ensure that these documentation endeavors are successful. But in other times, it becomes a kind of strategic opportunity to showcase projects through technical visibility opportunities through these different documentations. So, it depends on how big a communications team. Sometimes organizations have to kind of support the documentation efforts of a project. Hopefully that helps, Melinda.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question in the chat, and I'm going to direct this to Olivia, please. Since context really matters in the application of public health activities through HCD, what is the guidance on what to capture about traditions, culture, and other local community factors, and how to capture them without bias objectively? Olivia, would you like to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Yeah, so how do we capture these without having bias? So, of course, as researchers, we have to go into everything without bias. That is one of the things that we are taught. And how do we do this is more of listening. We have to listen to the end users. Who are we going to research on, or who are we involving in all this process? And I'll still tie it back to the four voices of design. We have to involve the end users. And once we listen to them, then all these bias can be evaded. Yeah, thank you, Melinda.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Mary, I've got a question for you. So, as Brian said, he had a pretty decent sized budget for the Beyond Bias project. But what about the case where your budget's really small or almost non-existent? How can this guide help just not allow for that those insights, that process to be captured more effectively, so you can use it next time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were really trying to build this guide for those projects, not for the Beyond Biases or the A360s of the world, which, do have a lot of resourcing for this. And in the guide, in that initial section I talked about, there's a tool to sort of help you sort out what are your goals and what are the resources available. And we kind of break documentation, into two types. And one we call the bare bones approach. And I think that's really what we are hoping, these projects that have sort of lower resources can use. And unfortunately, what we found is the bare bones approaches are not the ones that are shared widely. So, you can look at the documentation coming out of a Beyond Bias or an Adolescence 360 and say, there's no way I can do that. But I think what we really felt was like, if, as I said, if you just took maybe 15, 20 minutes after each activity that you do in your process and tried to complete the relevant template, which I think should be, fairly low resource. You don't really need any special tools. At the end of the project, you would have a lot of information which I think is an incredibly valuable resource, both for the field, if you were willing to share it, and we would love to see that, but also internally. Bram talked about staff turnover, something we are all familiar with, having just that, like, oh, let me just pull up the files. Let me see how far we've gotten. I think that would be, really, we hope that would be really useful. So we urge you to just, try doing the lowest lift possible. And I think we'd all be sort of surprised by how far that gets us. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anne has asked a question in the chat. Are there plans to share the guide or templates at any educational conferences? And I'm going to be at the International SVCC Summit next week. So I'm going to be, spreading the word and making sure it's visible, across referencing it across different panels I'm speaking on. And also the Global Alliance for SVC is going to have a booth. So I'll make sure that that they've got some kind of at least some paraphernalia on it there. So, but I don't know if the other panelists have other plans at specific events or conferences. Thanks. Anyone? Anything planned? Looks like there's some appetite for that. So great. Prosody has asked a question. Some of us are very new to this HCD concept. That's great. What if wanting to develop skills more about HCD, what are the top 3 to 5 skills should a new practitioner work to build? Any quick tips? Liz, I'm gonna point that one to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The first big one that comes to mind, and I would love to hear from the other panelists and also the designers in the room. The first one that comes to my mind is facilitation. So much of what we have to do as designers is ensure that we're not just acting alone as a design team, that comes in. And so facilitation is extremely important. And also, I think we sort of take it for granted that, oh, just because we're the ones at the front of the room with the slides, that means we know how to facilitate and move a process forward. But to do this well and truly invest in a co-design process, being able to share power through participatory facilitation is really hard, and you have to be intentional about that, through the way that you set your environment, the people that you have in the room, the way that you handle discussion and things like that. So I would say that's a number one. If there's training that you can attend, or even just, when you're thinking about preparing for a session, what small changes can you make to your plans to ensure that what you're doing is really guiding a process rather than like applying your own sort of
Yeah.
expectations. Yeah.
No, I think that's terrific advice. I totally agree with you, Liz. We've got a few minutes left. We have one other poll, and I'm really curious to see people's answers to this. So, Elizabeth, if you could launch that second poll, it's about using AI for HCD documentation. Really curious about what people's experiences have been in using AI, if they're using it, if they're not. So, would love to get people's thoughts on that as we get that second poll going.
Sorry, Melinda, I'm having a bit of trouble launching it.
Okay.
Give me oh, there we go. Okay,
there we
should
go.
be up. Sorry for
Excellent.
that.
All right. No worries. All right. So what's your experience using AI for HCD documentation? Got 5 options. Would love to hear from folks. And yeah, and maybe I think, Mary, you were telling me about some interesting experience you've had with using AI. Can you share that while we just have people answer this poll? Thanks.
Sure. So I've done it for a little bit of synthesis. I use Miro quite often, and Miro boards at the end can be a little overwhelming after everybody's dropped their feedback. So I have used Miro's AI tool to basically take all the post-it notes and put them in a deck, and then do some initial synthesis. And I think it's helpful for sort of like getting things in a more usable, readable format, especially if you then, are I think often a challenge from documentation can be to take the pieces from Miro and then put them into a template that's easy to digest. So I have found that that's sort of a helpful stepping stone. I mean, it can't do it on its own yet. We still need that human piece and interpretation. But I think there's a lot of ways potentially that AI could be used to just help create some order after all the messy human thinking that then could potentially make synthesis a little bit easier.
Wonderful, thanks. Well, we've got about 32 responses in. Looks like the most people have not used it, but are curious. So, and then I'm actually, it's got me thinking. I've got another question here in the chat. At what stage is the guideline now? What is the next step in the development of the guideline? Perhaps, how to use AI is that next step, and kind of helpful prompts and how to kind of guide people through again, how to use it and how to use it well. Like you say, it can't just be AI doing all of the work and interpretation. It does need the human element. So, perhaps that's the next step in the guide.
Melinda, can I actually just make one comment on the next step?
Please. Yes.
We've drafted this. We didn't have a ton of resources, so there has not been a lot of field testing. It's all been sort of based on our retrospective experience. So if folks are using the guide, trying out the templates, if there's stuff you like, stuff you hate, we have some contact info on the back, and there's nothing I would like more than to get real world feedback on this guide. So if you use it, please let us know. So just wanted to put that plug in there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it because one of my kind of final calls to the audience is to say use it. We'd like to see on your next project, try one of the templates, download that guide, try it on your next project, and share what works and what doesn't from the guide, and also what you'd like to see on future guides, because I think, again, this is a really what we've experienced through the HCD Exchange project is it's just a really great community that is very open with its knowledge and resources, and so we want to continue to get that to continue to share. So please share with any one of us your experience with the guide and any ideas that you have for improving it, or things that you'd like to get more guidance on. And so with that, I want to thank you very much for joining us on this fantastic launch. Again, the links for the documents are in the chat. And please again, share feedback, share thoughts, and share the guide widely. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.